The summer sun beat down on our quiet suburban street, where kids rode their bikes up and down the sidewalks, laughter echoing through the neighborhood. My son, Daniel, had just turned 12 and spent every afternoon outside with his friends, pedaling around until the streetlights flickered on. He loved that new mountain bike we'd saved up for months to buy him. It was his pride and joy, bright red with shiny chrome handlebars. But one afternoon, when I heard shouting from across the street, I froze. Mrs. Turner, our HOA treasurer, stood on her porch pointing directly at Daniel, her face red with fury. "That's my grandson's bike you're riding," she screamed, her voice sharp enough to turn every head on the block. The chatter around us stopped instantly. Neighbors peeked out of their windows, kids dropped their basketballs, and suddenly all eyes were on my son. Daniel skidded to a halt, his mouth falling open. Confused and scared, I felt my chest tighten. My son wasn't a thief. He had worked hard, doing chores and saving birthday money for that bike. But Mrs. Turner wasn't backing down. She stormed down her walkway, jabbing her finger at him, insisting he'd stolen it. Whispers started buzzing among the neighbors. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just about a bike. This was about my son's character, and the entire neighborhood was about to witness what kind of boy he really was. The neighborhood had always seemed safe, the kind of place where parents let their kids roam free until dinner time, and the sound of cicadas filled the air. Houses lined both sides of the cul-de-sac, each one nearly identical in design but distinct in character. Trimmed hedges, manicured lawns, and rows of flower beds gave the street a picture-perfect look. A look carefully maintained by the HOA. It was the kind of place people moved into believing they had achieved a slice of suburban paradise. But beneath that glossy exterior lived tension, politics, and an unspoken rule. Appearances mattered more than truth. Daniel had always been an energetic kid. He was polite, kind, and a little shy around adults, but with his friends he came alive. His birthday had been a highlight of the year. He had wanted a mountain bike for months, showing me pictures online and circling ads in store flyers. My husband and I had agreed to save up, though times were tight. Every dollar counted, but when we saw the joy in his eyes as he unwrapped the shiny red bike with black-rimmed wheels, it felt worth every sacrifice. He had hugged us so tightly that morning, whispering, "Thank you, Mom. Thank you. Dad, I'll take care of it, I promise." He kept that promise. Every night he parked the bike neatly in the garage, wiping off the dust from its frame like it was a treasured possession. Every day he rode it carefully, never leaving it lying on the grass or sidewalk like the other kids sometimes did. It wasn't just a bike to him. It was a symbol of independence, of freedom. But Mrs. Turner had always been suspicious. She was the kind of neighbor who knew everyone's business before you did. Her husband had passed years ago, and now she poured all her time into the HOA, treating it less like a community service and more like her personal kingdom. She had a grandson, Tyler, who was Daniel's age, though the two couldn't have been more different. Tyler was brash, loud, and often careless with his belongings. His old bike, a faded blue BMX, had gone missing weeks before, and instead of blaming her grandson's forgetfulness, Mrs. Turner insisted it must have been stolen. Rumors spread quickly in a neighborhood like ours. The HOA board meetings were less about maintaining order and more about whisper campaigns. One week it was a complaint about a family's trash bins being left out too long. The next it was gossip about someone's untrimmed hedges. When Tyler's bike disappeared, Mrs. Turner wasted no time hinting that someone's child had sticky fingers. At first I ignored it. Children lost things all the time. But when Daniel rolled out with his new mountain bike, its bright red paint catching the sunlight, I noticed the way her eyes narrowed still. I never thought she'd confront us so openly that afternoon. I had been trimming the roses along our front porch when the shouting began. I looked up just in time to see Mrs. Turner's finger jabbing toward Daniel, her voice echoing down the block. "That's my grandson's bike," she bellowed. Daniel froze. His small hands gripped the handlebars tighter as his feet hovered uncertainly above the pedals. He looked at me, eyes wide as if begging me to step in. My heart dropped at the sight of his trembling lips, the confusion written all over his face. The other children stopped their games, forming a half circle at the edge of the street. Parents emerged from their doorways, curiosity painted on their faces. The neighborhood that had always felt so familiar suddenly felt hostile. Every window and porch light like a spotlight shining down on us, Mrs. Turner, I said firmly, wiping the dirt from my gloves as I stepped onto the sidewalk. That bike belongs to my son. We bought it for him just last month, but she was relentless. Don't you dare lie to me? Tyler had one just like it, and now it's gone. And suddenly your boy has one? Do you think we're stupid? Her words stung, not because they were true, but because of how easily they could spread. The power she held over the community was subtle but dangerous. If she planted doubt in the minds of the neighbors, it wouldn't matter that we had receipts. It wouldn't matter that Daniel was innocent. The stain of being accused would linger. Daniel dismounted, his voice small but steady. It's mine, Mrs. Turner. My parents gave it to me for my birthday. I didn't take Tyler's bike, but his protest only fueled her fire. Of course you'd say that. Thieves never admit the truth. Just wait until the HOA hears about this. I could feel my pulse quicken. The HOA, her kingdom. If she filed an official complaint, we would be dragged into a hearing, forced to prove ourselves before a panel of neighbors who already leaned toward her influence. The thought made my stomach churn. I walked over to Daniel, placing a hand on his shoulder. His body trembled beneath my touch, and it broke me to see him so shaken. Go inside, sweetheart, I whispered. Let me handle this. He hesitated but obeyed, wheeling his bike slowly up the driveway, his head hanging low as whispers followed him. Mrs. Turner crossed her arms, smug in her stance. You can send him inside all you want, but the truth will come out. I won't let my grandson be made a fool of. Her words cut deeper than she realized. This wasn't just about the bike anymore. It was about my child's reputation, his character. And the thought of him being branded a thief, even unjustly, ignited a fire in me. The rest of that evening passed in a blur. Daniel didn't come out of his room for dinner. He just sat on his bed, staring at the bike propped against the wall. When I tried to comfort him, he asked quietly, Mom, do the neighbors think I'm a thief? His voice cracked and tears welled in his eyes. No, sweetheart, I said, pulling him close. We know the truth. And the truth always comes out. But deep down, I wasn't sure. The next morning, the HOA newsletter hit every doorstep. I picked it up on my way back from walking the dog, and my hands shook as I read the thinly veiled accusation in the community concerns section. It has come to our attention that a child in our neighborhood may be in possession of stolen property. We urge parents to keep a closer eye on their children's activities. They hadn't named Daniel outright, but everyone knew. Mrs. Turner's words had spread like wildfire. By the time we drove past the school that afternoon, I could feel the stares. Other kids whispered. A mother pulled her child a little closer as we walked by. Daniel's joy for riding his bike disappeared overnight. The bike that once gave him freedom now sat untouched in the garage, as if even he had begun to question whether it was cursed. I tried reaching out to Mrs. Turner, but she ignored me. At the HOA meeting later that week, she brought it up again, this time louder and prouder. We have thieves among us, she declared. And if we let this slide, what will they steal next? Our packages? Our cars? The murmurs in the room grew louder. Some nodded in agreement. Others looked away uncomfortably, unwilling to challenge her. I raised my hand, my voice shaking as I said, We have proof of purchase for that bike. We can show receipts. My son is not a thief, but Mrs. Turner smirked. If that's true, then why not bring the receipt tonight? Why hide behind excuses? The trap was clear. She thrived on public confrontation, on planting doubt before the proof could surface. I felt cornered, humiliated, and angry. When I returned home, Daniel was waiting anxiously. Did they believe you? He asked. I couldn't answer. The truth was, I didn't know. In the days that followed, the tension in our neighborhood thickened. Friends who once waved stopped making eye contact. Parents kept their children a little closer. Daniel withdrew into himself, spending more time in his room and less time outside. I heard him crying softly one night, and it shattered me. That's when I knew I couldn't let this go. This wasn't just about defending a bike. It was about defending my son's name, his dignity. Mrs. Turner might have power in the HOA, but I had something stronger, the truth. And I was determined to prove it, no matter what it took. The breaking point came the following weekend. The sun was shining, the smell of freshly cut grass filled the air, and yet there was no joy in our household. Daniel had begged me not to make him ride his bike, but I insisted. If you hide, they win, I told him. You did nothing wrong. Hold your head high, he nodded reluctantly, wheeling the bike out of the garage. But the hesitation in his every movement told me just how much the accusations weighed on him. When he finally mounted the seat and began pedaling down the block, I stood on the porch, forcing myself to smile. Maybe if the neighbors saw him ride proudly, they would remember he was just a boy. Not the criminal Mrs. Turner painted him to be, but fate had other plans halfway down the street. A voice cut through the air like a knife. There he is, the bike thief. Mrs. Turner again. This time she wasn't alone. She had gathered a small group of neighbors on her lawn, including 2 members of the HOA board. Their eyes followed Daniel as if he were prey, and my stomach twisted. Daniel slowed, his face paling, and then he did something that nearly broke me. He turned around and rode back home, tears streaming down his cheeks before he even made it to the driveway. Mom, I can't do this, he sobbed, throwing the bike down on the grass. They all hate me. I wanted to scream at Mrs. Turner to tell her she was destroying a child's spirit over nothing. But I held back because rage wouldn't save us, it would only feed her narrative. What I needed was undeniable proof that night. I searched through drawers and files until I found the crumpled receipt from the sporting goods store, dated and stamped. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced with determination. Paper wasn't enough. Mrs. Turner would claim it was fake, that we were covering for Daniel. I needed something bigger, something that would silence her once and for alas. I sat at the kitchen table. Turning the receipt over in my hands, my husband leaned against the counter. You're not going to convince her, he said quietly. She doesn't care about the truth, she cares about control. Then we'll show the truth to everyone else, I replied. If the neighborhood sees it, if they see what she's doing to Daniel, maybe they'll finally open their eyes. The plan began to take shape. The store where we bought the bike had cameras and records. If I could get an official statement, maybe even footage of Daniel picking it out, it would be irrefutable. I went to bed that night with my mind racing, the weight of my son's innocence pressing down on me like a stone. The next morning, Daniel refused to come downstairs for breakfast. His appetite was gone, his energy drained. What's the point, Mom? He whispered. They'll never believe me, and that's when I saw it. The spark in his eyes, the hope he used to carry, was fading. He was starting to believe the lie. That terrified me more than anything Mrs. Turner could say. I crouched beside him, holding his hand. Listen to me. You are not a thief. You are not what she says you are. And I promise you, Daniel, I will make everyone see the truth. Do you trust me? He looked at me for a long moment before nodding slowly. That nod fueled me. I didn't care if I had to dig through every record, drag the entire HOA into court, or confront Mrs. Turner in front of the whole neighborhood. This wasn't just about a bike anymore. This was about saving my son's spirit before it was crushed beyond repair, and as I tucked the receipt safely into my purse, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't just defending him now, I was preparing for war. The following week felt like walking through enemy territory. Every time I stepped outside, I felt the weight of eyes on me. Some neighbors still waved politely, but most offered only stiff nods or avoided contact altogether. The whispers hadn't stopped, they had only grown louder, carried on the breeze like poison. Daniel, once so full of life, refused to play outside. The bike sat in the garage gathering dust, a bright red reminder of everything he had lost in a matter of days. It didn't take long before Mrs. Turner escalated. She filed an official complaint with accusing Daniel of theft and claiming that the bike on our property matched the description of her grandson's stolen one. The letter arrived in our mailbox in a crisp white envelope, sealed with the HOA emblem like some kind of legal summons. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper. This matter will be reviewed by the HOA board at the upcoming meeting. You are required to attend and provide an explanation. Failure to comply may result in community fines, restrictions, and further escalation. They were treating this like a crime. Like we were criminals. I showed the letter to my husband, whose face darkened with anger. This is ridiculous, he muttered, crumpling it in his fist. They can't threaten us over something like this. It's a kid's bike, but to Mrs. Turner, it wasn't about the bike, it was about control, about teaching us a lesson for daring to defy her authority. And she had stacked the board with OLIs over the years, people who owed her favors, people too afraid to cross her when the night of the meeting came. I dressed Daniel in his best collared shirt and told him to sit beside me. "We'll show them we have nothing to hide," I whispered. But his hands fidgeted nervously in his lap, his eyes darting around the crowded room. The community center buzzed with chatter as neighbors filled the folding chairs, eager for drama. Mrs. Turner sat at the front, her lips curled in a satisfied smirk as she whispered into the ear of another board member. The sight made my blood boil. When our case was called, she wasted no time standing up. "This is simple," she declared, her voice carrying across the room. "My grandson's bike went missing 3 weeks ago. Now suddenly the boy across the street has one just like it. Same size, same style, same color. What are the odds?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I stood, clutching the receipt in my hand like a weapon. "The odds," I said firmly, "are that families buy bikes. And we saved for months to buy this one for my son's birthday. I have proof right here." I held up the receipt, but Mrs. Turner waved her hand dismissively. "Anyone can print a fake receipt these days. What matters is what the eye can see. And we all see the truth, don't we?" She turned, gesturing to the audience. A few nodded reluctantly, and my stomach churned. I wanted to scream, to tell them how unfair this was. But I forced myself to stay calm. "If you want proof, I'll get more. The store has records. They have cameras. We bought that bike fair and square, and I will bring back every piece of evidence you need." The board members exchanged glances. Finally, the chairperson cleared his throat. "Until such proof is presented, we will consider this matter unresolved. Both parties will be monitored, and further action may be taken." Monitored? Like we were under investigation? Like my 12-year-old son was some kind of criminal suspect? As we left the meeting, Daniel clung to my arm. "They don't believe us, Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking. "They think I'm a thief." Tears stung my eyes, but I swallowed them back. "Then we'll make them believe," I said. "No matter what it takes." The next morning, I drove straight to the sporting goods store with the receipt in hand. The manager listened patiently as I explained the situation, his brow furrowing deeper with every word. "This is outrageous," he muttered, shaking his head. "Of course we can confirm the purchase. We keep digital records for every transaction. Give me a day, and I'll get you everything you need." True to his word, he called the following evening. Not only did he provide a copy of the sales record with my credit card number attached, but he also pulled security footage from the day of the purchase. There, on the grainy black and white screen, was Daniel smiling wide, climbing onto the red mountain bike in the store aisle while I stood beside him. Laughing, I felt a surge of triumph. Proof, undeniable proof, but even armed with evidence, I knew Mrs. Turner wouldn't back down easily. She thrived on the drama, on the power it gave her. And I was right. When I presented the documents at the next HOA meeting, the room erupted. Some neighbors gasped. Others whispered. I laid the papers and the video stills on the table, my hands steady, my voice clear. "This is the truth. This is proof. My son is innocent." But Mrs. Turner only sneered. "Or maybe you knew someone at the store. Maybe you staged this whole thing. Are we really going to let a single receipt and a blurry video decide this case?" "We all know what we saw." Her words slithered through the crowd, planting seeds of doubt. And to my horror, some neighbors nodded. Daniel's face crumpled, and I reached for his hand under the table. He squeezed it so tightly it hurt, as though clinging to me was the only thing keeping him from falling apart. That night, I broke down. I waited until Daniel was asleep before burying my face in my hands, sobbing quietly at the kitchen table. My husband rubbed my back, whispering, "We'll get through this," but his voice carried no conviction. Days turned into weeks, and the whispers didn't fade. If anything, they grew louder. Kids at school taunted Daniel, calling him thief in the hallways. He stopped smiling. He stopped laughing. The light in his eyes dimmed. And with every passing day, my rage toward Mrs. Turner grew. One evening, after dinner, Daniel finally spoke the words I had dreaded. "Maybe I should just give her the bike, Mom. If she wants it so badly, maybe then she'd leave us alone." The suggestion shattered me. "No," I said firmly, pulling him into my arms. "You don't give bullies what they want. You don't let them take what you've earned." This is yours, Daniel, yours, and we're going to fight for it. But as I said the words, I realized something. This fight wasn't just about a bike anymore. It was about the kind of man my son would grow up to be. Would he learn to cave under false accusations, or would he learn to stand tall in the face of lies? I couldn't let Mrs. Turner define him. I couldn't let her win, so I made a decision. At the next HOA meeting, I wouldn't just present evidence. I would confront her head-on. No more polite rebuttals. No more quiet defenses. I would expose her pettiness for the entire neighborhood to see. The night of the meeting, the room was packed. Word had spread, and neighbors filled every seat, eager for the drama. Mrs. Turner sat smugly at the front, Tyler beside her, slouched in his chair with a scowl on his face. When our case came up, I stood tall, the documents clutched in my hands. "You've seen the proof," I said, my voice ringing out. "You've seen the receipts, the video. My son is innocent. And yet Mrs. Turner continues to spread lies and continues to poison this community with baseless accusations. This isn't about a bike anymore. This is about a woman who cannot admit when she's wrong." Gasps rippled through the room. Mrs. Turner's face reddened. She shot to her feet. "How dare you?" "No," I cut her off, my voice steady. "How dare you? How dare you drag a child's name through the mud just to cover up your grandson's carelessness? Tyler lost his bike because he didn't take care of his things. That's not my son's fault. And the whole neighborhood knows it." All eyes turned to Tyler, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His mother, sitting in the back, looked away, shame flickering across her face. Mrs. Turner sputtered, her words tangled in fury. You have no right." "I have every right," I said firmly. "Because this is my son you're attacking. And I won't stand by while you destroy his reputation just to protect your pride." The room was silent. For the first time, Mrs. Turner looked uncertain, her grip on the crowd slipping, and in that silence I realized something. This was bigger than her. Bigger than me. This was about showing my son that truth mattered, that courage mattered. The climax was coming. And whether Mrs. Turner liked it or not, the truth was about to be revealed in a way she could never twist or deny. Climax. The room was heavy with tension, so thick it seemed to press down on my shoulders as I stood at the front of the HOA meeting. My son sat beside me, his head bowed, his small hands clenched into fists. I could feel the tremor in his body even without touching him. Across the table, Mrs. Turner glared at us with eyes full of fire, her lips curled into that same venomous smirk that had haunted us for weeks. Around us, the neighbors leaned in, hungry for drama, waiting to see if the boy labeled the thief would be condemned or redeemed. I could hear my own pulse in my ears as I gripped the stack of evidence in my hands. The receipt, the sales record, the store footage. All of it was there, all of it undeniable. Yet deep down, I knew it wouldn't be enough. Not for her. Mrs. Turner didn't thrive on facts. She thrived on perception, on twisting the narrative until it fit her story. She had already planted doubt in the minds of half the neighborhood. But tonight, I wasn't going to just prove her wrong. Tonight I was going to expose her. "Enough of this charade," Mrs. Turner snapped, standing suddenly, her hands pressed flat against the table. Her voice carried through the room like a whip. "You parade these so-called receipts in front of us, but anyone with a computer could fabricate them. We all know what we saw. We saw your boy riding a bike identical to my grandson's. Are you all really going to sit here and pretend this doesn't stink of guilt?" Her words ignited murmurs among the crowd. A few nodded in agreement. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Daniel's face reddened, his eyes glassy with tears he refused to let fall. I reached for his hand beneath the table and squeezed it gently. I rose to my feet, steadying my voice. "You say we all know what we saw, but what you really mean is we all know what you told us to see. You've poisoned this community with your lies, Mrs. Turner, but lies always have a way of unraveling." Her eyes narrowed. "Careful." "No," I shot back, louder this time. "You've spent weeks tearing down a 12-year-old boy because you can't face the truth that your grandson lost his bike because of his own carelessness. You humiliated Daniel in front of the entire neighborhood. You dragged him through meetings, newsletters, whispers at school. And all because you couldn't accept that sometimes things go missing in life. Sometimes kids make mistakes." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Turner's face turned crimson, her jaw tightening. Tyler squirmed beside her, tugging at the sleeve of his hoodie. He looked pale, nervous, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape I noticed. "And so did the neighbors. Tell me, Mrs. Turner," I continued, stepping closer, my voice growing stronger. "If you're so sure Daniel stole your grandson's bike, why has no one ever seen Tyler's? Why haven't we seen photos of it? Why hasn't anyone in this room ever seen it in his garage, on this street, anywhere at all?" The murmurs grew louder. People exchanged uncertain glances. Mrs. Turner stiffened. But before she could respond, Tyler suddenly blurted out, his voice cracking, "Because it wasn't stolen." The room fell into silence so sharp it made my ears ring. All eyes turned to him. His grandmother's head snapped around, her mouth opening in horror. "Tyler, don't you dare," but it was too late. Tyler was shaking, his face drenched in sweat. "It wasn't stolen. I left it at the park. I forgot about it, okay? I went back the next day and it was gone. I didn't tell you because I knew you'd be mad. So I said it was stolen. I didn't think it would turn into all this." His voice broke, and tears spilled down his cheeks for a moment. The room was frozen. Then, like a tidal wave, the murmurs erupted into gasps, whispers, exclamations. Neighbors leaned toward one another, hands covering their mouths, eyes wide with shock. Mrs. Turner's face went pale. Her mouth opening and closing as if words had abandoned. Harry felt Daniel grip my hand tighter, his eyes widening. His lips trembled, but for the first time in weeks, there was a spark of hope in his gaze. "You lied?" Mrs. Turner hissed, her voice low but trembling with rage. "You mean to tell me I've stood up here, fighting for you, defending you, and all this time it wasn't his fault?" I cut in sharply. "He's a child. Children make mistakes." "The fault is yours, Mrs. Turner. You turned a child's mistake into a witch hunt. You dragged my son's name through the mud because you couldn't handle the truth. And you owe him an apology." The room erupted with murmurs again, but this time I could feel the shift. People were no longer nodding with her. They were staring at her with disgust, shaking their heads, whispering about her arrogance. The tide had turned. Mrs. Turner stumbled backward into her chair, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of the table. Her grandson sat beside her, still crying, wiping his face with his sleeve. For the first time she looked small, fragile, her authority shattered. She stammered, her voice faltering. "I was only trying to protect him by destroying another child?" I demanded, my voice ringing through the hall. "You didn't protect him. You humiliated him in front of the entire neighborhood. And you tried to destroy my son's spirit in the process. You owe this community more than an apology. You owe it an explanation." The chairperson cleared his throat, his expression stern. "Mrs. Turner, it seems clear that this entire situation was built on a false premise. Tyler has admitted the truth, and we cannot ignore that. The accusations against Daniel are hereby dismissed." Effective immediately, relief flooded me like a wave. Daniel squeezed my hand, and I could feel the tears welling in his eyes. For the first time in weeks, they weren't tears of shame or fear, they were tears of release, of victory. But the meeting wasn't over yet. "Furthermore," the chairperson continued, "we must consider the damage caused by these accusations. A child's reputation has been unfairly tarnished, Mrs. Turner. Your behavior has been inappropriate, unbecoming of a board member, and deeply harmful to this community. As of this moment, you are suspended from your duties as treasurer pending further review." The room erupted in applause, loud, cathartic, a release of weeks of tension. Neighbors clapped, some even stood, their eyes bright with vindication. For once, the community wasn't rallying behind Mrs. Turner, they were rallying against her. She sat frozen, her face white as chalk, her hands shaking. Tyler buried his face in his arms. Ashamed, I turned to Daniel, pulling him into my arms. He buried his face against my chest, his shoulders shaking with sobs. "See?" I whispered, stroking his hair. "The truth always comes out." As the meeting dispersed, neighbors approached us, one by one. "We're so sorry," one mother said, her eyes full of guilt. "We should have believed you from the start." Another man clapped Daniel gently on the shoulder. "You're a good kid," he said. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Daniel nodded shyly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. It was small, But it was the first real smile I had seen in weeks as we walked home under the glow of the streetlights, the night air cool against our faces. Daniel whispered, "Mom." "We won." I squeezed his hand, my heart swelling. "Yes, sweetheart. We did, but deep down I knew this was more than just a win. It was a lesson." Daniel had been tested in a way no child should be, and he had come through stronger. He had seen what lies could do, how cruel people could be. But he had also seen what courage, truth, and resilience could achieve. And as for Mrs. Turner, her reign over the neighborhoods was over. Her lies had caught up with her, her power stripped away by her own grandson's confession. The truth had shattered her kingdom, leaving her with nothing but shame. Daniel single quotes S bike still sat in the garage, shining red under the dim light. But now it wasn't just a bike. It was a symbol, a reminder of the battle we had fought, the truth we had defended, and the victory we had earned together. When Daniel climbed on it the next morning, pedaling down the street with his head held high, neighbors waved, smiling warmly. No whispers, no glares, only support, only respect. For the first time in weeks I breathed freely. And as I watched him ride into the sunlight, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. No one would ever call my son a thief again. The neighborhood felt different the morning after the HOA's emergency meeting. For the first time in weeks, there wasn't a heaviness hanging over our street. People walked their dogs without darting suspicious glances at our house. Children rode their bikes without parents rushing to pull them back inside. And even the air seemed lighter, freer. But inside our home, the silence was heavier than ever. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, tracing circles on the wood surface with his finger, his plate of pancakes untouched. My husband glanced at me, silently asking if I was going to say something. I sat down across from him and forced a smile. "You don't have to be scared anymore," I told him gently. "Everyone knows the truth now." He looked up, his eyes filled with doubt. "Do they, though? What if they still think I'm lying? What if they only believe you because you yelled louder?" The words broke me. He had carried that weight for so long that he wasn't sure how to put it down. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone anymore. The truth is out. What matters now is that you know who you are, and I know who you are." Daniel nodded, but his expression told me it would take more than words to erase the scars. Mrs. Turner's accusations had left later that afternoon. We stepped outside for the first time since the meeting. Daniel wheeled his bike to the driveway cautiously, as though it might still draw hostile stares. But instead, something unexpected happened across the street. Mr. Lawson, the HOA vice president, who had been silent during most of the ordeal, raised his hand in a hesitant wave. Then Mrs. Miller from next door called out, "Hey, Daniel, nice ride. Looks fast." Her voice was warm, almost apologetic. Slowly, one by one, neighbors began to greet us again. Their faces softened with something resembling regret. Daniel blinked in disbelief. "They're nice?" I smiled at him. They should have been all along. The real turning point came a few days later. The AOA sent an official letter, printed and sealed with their logo, not only apologizing to Daniel but also declaring publicly that Mrs. Turner's accusations had been false and damaging. They promised to revise their procedures to prevent personal vendettas from turning into witch hunts in the future. It wasn't just words, it was accountability still. Not everyone was willing to let it go so easily. Mrs. Turner herself had retreated into her house, blinds closed tight, her front lawn unattended for the first time in years. Rumors swirled that she might step down from the board, but others whispered she was plotting some kind of comeback. The neighborhood was divided. Some felt sorry for her, claiming she was just a grandmother protecting her grandson. Others were furious, demanding she be removed from the HOA altogether. For me, none of that mattered. What mattered was Daniel. One evening, about a week after everything calmed down, I found him in the garage polishing his bike. He looked up at me with a small, tentative smile. "You know, Mom, I don't feel scared to ride anymore." I leaned against the doorway, my chest swelling with relief. "I'm glad. That bike was supposed to bring you joy, not pain." He nodded thoughtfully. "It does now. Because every time I ride it, I'll remember that you believed me. Even when no one else did." Tears stung my eyes, but I managed to smile. "That's because I'll always believe you, Daniel." Always from that day on, Daniel rode his bike with a confidence that made my heart ache with pride. The same neighbors who once whispered behind his back now cheered him on as he sped past. His laughter ringing through the streets like music hit wasn't just a bike anymore, it was a symbol of resilience, of truth triumphing over lies. Months later, the HOA held new board elections. Mrs. Turner did not run again. Instead, a new group of leaders was voted in, people who promised transparency, fairness, and above all, compassion. The neighborhood began to heal, not just from what had happened to Daniel, but from the toxic culture of fear and control that had allowed it to spiral so far. At the annual block party that summer, I watched Daniel race down the street with his friends, his red bike gleaming in the sunlight. He was smiling again, the real smile, the one that had been missing for far too long. Mrs. Miller approached me with a cup of lemonade in her hand. "You know," she said quietly, "I owe you and Daniel an apology. I should have spoken up sooner. I knew in my gut that Mrs. Turner was wrong, but I was too scared to say anything." I shook my head gently. "You're not the only one. But you're here now, and that's what matters." She nodded, her eyes misting. "He's a good kid. The neighborhood's lucky to have him." As I stood there, watching my son finally reclaim the joy he'd nearly lost, I realized something profound. The truth wasn't just about clearing his name. It was about teaching him that lies can spread, neighbors can falter, and even entire communities can turn against you, but character, honesty, and resilience will always shine brighter in the end. That night, after the party had ended and the laughter had faded into silence, Daniel came into my room holding a small notebook. "Mom, can I read you something?" He asked. "Of course," I said. Setting my book aside, he opened the notebook and began to read aloud. It was a story he'd written about a boy accused of something he didn't do, about how it felt to be judged unfairly, and about the power of standing tall in the face of lies. His words were raw, emotional, and wise beyond his years. When he finished, I hugged him tightly. "That's beautiful, Daniel. You're turning your pain into something powerful." He smiled shyly. I don't want anyone else to feel the way I did." And at that moment, I knew he would be okay, because the truth hadn't just cleared his name, it had given him strength, empathy, and a voice he would carry with him for the rest of his life. Our neighborhood would never forget what happened. Some would always remember it as the scandal that toppled a longtime HOA treasurer. Others would remember it as the summer the community finally changed. But for me, it would always be the summer. My son learned the hardest lesson of all: that people will doubt you, accuse you, and even hate you, but the truth will always rise, and the people who truly matter will always stand by your side. As the days grew longer and the seasons shifted, I often found myself standing on the porch, watching Daniel pedal away down the street, his laughter floating back toward me. And every time I whispered the same words under my breath, a quiet vow to the boy who had endured so much: "You're not a thief. You never were. And you never will." Baby truth had shocked everyone, but most importantly, it had set my son free. Now I ask you, do you think Mrs. Turner deserves a second chance? Or was the damage to my son's reputation unforgivable?
This was just one story, but the next one will be even more dramatic. Are you ready? Then you need to subscribe to HOA Stories 87 right now. Like this video, share it with your friends, and hit the bell because the next story might sound a little too close to home.